Joining me now from Capitol Hill in Washington, D.C., representing Georgia's 10th Congressional District, Congressman Jody Hice. Congressman, all right, so they tested the word bribery, and so that's why we've been hearing bribery. First it was quid pro quo. There was a lot of mention of quid pro quo today, but of course the Democrats want to try and channel it into bribery, but I've seen no evidence of bribery, especially if you use, Congressman, the definition that the framers meant of bribery of a commander-in-chief, specifically the President of the United States. It's nothing close to what the Democrats are trying to shoehorn into this impeachment inquiry. Bribery to the framers of the Constitution was very simple, and that is a foreign entity, probably, could be domestic, but a foreign entity coming with a bag of money saying to President Trump, hey, we want you to do this in exchange for that. There's not even close evidence relating to anything close to what the framers meant for bribery.
Well, you're exactly right. And in fact, we now have 3,500 pages that came forth from the deposition that was transcribed from the various depositions. 3,500 pages. Only one time was the word bribe or bribery even used, and that was not in relationship to President Trump, but Vice President Biden. I mean, this whole thing, the Democrats do not even know themselves what the supposed impeachable offense is. We started with quid pro quo, then to extortion, then to bribery, today back to quid pro quo. They're all over the map. This is a trial in search of a crime, and the Democrats are clueless as to what that impeachable offense might even be.
So if we do talk about a quid pro quo, and by the way, quid pro quo, one of the reasons why the Democrats moved away from quid pro quo is, first of all, most of America probably doesn't understand Latin, probably doesn't understand exactly, didn't study Latin, doesn't understand what quid pro quo is. You know, it's something for something else, effectively, what quid pro quo means, in case there are some folks who still don't quite understand. But if there was a quid pro quo in this case, it seems pretty clear to me now, after Ambassador Sondland's testimony, that the quid pro quo was, hey, Ukraine, clean up your act. This is President Trump to Ukraine. Clean up your act, root out corruption, find out if there's criminal activity involving Americans or not. That would be Hunter Biden, possibly Joe Biden, Barista, what have you. Find out what happened during the 2016 election cycle, as reported by Politico. This is not some sort of conspiracy theory from the far right wing. This was reported by mainstream so-called media. Find out what's going on, root out corruption, and if you pledge to do this, then we'll set up a meeting in the White House with the new president. What's wrong with that?
Well, that's right. And further, what the president was doing in that regard was abiding by the law. The president is supposed to make sure that the hard-earned monies of the American taxpayer is not going to be wasted in corruption when we are giving foreign aid to other countries. He has that responsibility. It is the law. And so that is the issue, and yet the Democrats are trying to make this into something that it totally isn't. And even Sondland himself is trying to create a possibility of this being something that it isn't. But to me, he destroyed his own testimony by readily admitting that this was all his presumption, not rooted whatsoever in fact, not rooted in evidence, merely presumption. How do you impeach a president? How do you convict anyone of any kind of crime in this country, let alone impeaching the president of the United States, when all you're dealing with is presumption? And prior to this point, second, third, fourth-hand type information. This is a trial that is totally based on fallacy, error, and absolutely zero evidence. I again believe it's totally collapsing right under the nose of the Democrats.
The president, Sondland, went on to say that the president indeed wanted some sort of public statement from Ukraine. But there's a backstory here, right? The president deeply skeptical of the veracity from a legal and above board sense of the Ukrainian government because of its history of corruption, one of the most corrupt countries on the planet. So he has a healthy skepticism going into something like this. And number two, because he was targeted. We know, again, this is not some sort of conspiracy theory. We know the president was targeted by some sort of entities within Ukraine, so that Hillary Clinton would benefit from this targeting of Donald Trump, right? In other words, they wanted Hillary Clinton to win. The Politico piece in January 2017, about 10 days before the president was sworn into office, the Politico piece pointed out how Ukraine officials were suddenly scrambling to get on the good side of the incoming president because of all these attacks that he suffered during the 2016 campaign. So there is a healthy skepticism built in for this president, and he has every right to be skeptical and then tether his support of the incoming president by saying, hey, you got to clean up your act.
Well, you're exactly right, and that is the issue. And keep in mind, this was all about the 2016 election. The Democrats are trying to spin this in the direction that the president was trying to do something in the upcoming election. But as you just brought out, corruption was taking place in the Ukraine to impact our 2016 election. We had an ongoing investigation with the Department of Justice into that matter, and the president wanted to make sure that that investigation was not going to be hindered when different individuals in the Ukraine were asked about it. And further, after the conversation that President Trump had with Zelensky, there were about 5 different meetings that took place. And in none of those meetings was there ever any mention of funds being held up for anything. It was all about finding out whether or not Zelensky was himself a person who could be trusted, a person like President Trump who is going to drain the swamp and deal with the corruption in the Ukraine. That was the issue. And when, according to the law, the president felt like the corruption issue, that the funds would be spent appropriately, they were totally released without an investigation or any other precondition.
Sondland also said that he never heard the President of the United States condition the aid on these investigations. Again, never heard the President of the United States condition releasing the aid predicated on the investigations. That's very important. Another important key piece of testimony, I think, Congressman, was the fact that all this was done in the open. There was no clandestine kind of hidden narrative going on here. And the Trump administration was not trying to hide anything, which goes to this phony cover-up that the Democrats are trying to foist upon this administration. And one last thing, Congressman, I think very important, Congressman Nunes brought up at the onset of the hearings today that the Democrats had promised that if there was going to be impeachment, it was going to be a bipartisan process. And clearly, this is nothing of the sort. Congressman, thank you.
Want to see more videos like this? Click on the link below and subscribe to One America News on YouTube. And call your cable provider and kindly demand that One America News is added to your lineup. Call and subscribe today.